the vibe of being in a queer community in the 90s where you're studying queerness and you're understanding difference in various cultural ways, especially when there is a kind of commercial gayness happening around you, which you feel alienated from. That in itself was a privilege to kind of go through that, as tricky and as difficult as it was, to sort of feel like now it's a place where we are dissing each other. It feels like we are becoming more factionalized again, and we don't actually have the venues and the spaces to go and collectively share our experience. I think that's quite scary.
I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Timberlina is the world's #1 ecologically minded bearded drag lady. But long before she was Timberlina, she was a university student racked with insecurity and longing. We caught up to talk about that time in her life and the Duke of Wellington, a bar in Islington, London, which confusingly is still a bar, but no longer a queer bar. Does that make sense?
I think I like the fact that it wasn't in the West End. I like the fact that it was a sort of local, but I also like the fact that it seemed very easy to pull people there. It was really great fun, and it was so wonderful living around the corner. I don't think I've ever lived in such. I just want to think about that before I say it, but no, I think it's true to say that I don't think I lived anywhere in such close proximity to a venue that was so fun and just seemed to attract sort of fun and sexy, hot people in a way that was also very laid back. So it was the other thing about it which I really liked for me was it was really unpretentious.
Yeah.
And I think that what was going on in West End, you had, because you basically had the opening of Soho sort of as a kind of commodified kind of pink pound venue place. You had the Village, and then you had Balance, and then you had Freedom opened, and that was kind of a queer alternative. But essentially, if you went up west, it was kind of a particular sort of hedonism and a particular kind of vibe, yes. And a crew that you would be looking to mingle with, and it was very mainstream. And I think that I just wasn't very mainstream. So I think that I like finding places. Oh my goodness! So places like Out. Oh my god.
First Out.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. First Out. Finding places like First Out. Not only was it really not a bar until like later on in the evening when they'd have very carefully sort of nuanced and what's the word I'm looking for? Curated evenings. But of course it was a cafe. It was like, oh my God, it was like a queer cafe. So anyway, going back to the Duke of Welly, what was great about the Duke of Welly, it was like a regular pub. It was like a pub, you'd go in there and you would drink pints and you would have a laugh. And you could take your mates, and you could take your mum, for that matter. But it was just very laid back, and I really liked the fact that it was just very, kind of unassuming, relaxed. I say laid back, but then there was also this crazy territorial thing going on between the lesbian room at the back and the men's room at the front, which is, looking back on it, quite hilarious.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. I want to know about the territorial thing. So did you get death stares when you walked into...
Yes. Yeah, I think, I probably thought I got more than I probably actually did, because I was very timid. I was a very timid little queer. But also because, of course, we're, again, like I said, we're studying these kind of quite austere queer studies, and all of this sort of academic queer discourse, and kind of transgender isms and drag kings. Like Della Grace Volcano came to do a talk at the university. I literally thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was just amazing, and it was very. I found it all very intimidating. So I found this room where the lesbians resided or went to was just like, so I was really trying to sort of overcompensate for my masculinity and my manness, or by being a man, by just sort of being. I've always been apologetic anyway to a fault. But do you know what I mean? I would. Sorry, what were you going to say?
So you were playing down your masculinity, or you were ramping up your masculinity?
Well, you see, I would have. That's an interesting question. I think because I was an apologist, and because I wouldn't have wanted to get on anyone's toes, I would have felt terribly embarrassed about being a man walking into a woman's space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was very conscious, and I thought it was very very PC. I thought it was very, very cool to be in this pub where there was this room, which, I would obviously like, well, no, you can't go in there. That's where the lesbians are. You can't go in there. No, because that's their space.
Don't interrupt them in their natural territory.
And then, of course, they'd come through to our space, and I'd be a bit like, well, should I feel... just full of baffled
how should I respond?
In my mind, obviously, trying to work it out. How should I respond? Those heady days.
So I wanted to ask, you made a comment before about how it was really easy to pull at the bar. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit more about that. Okay,
so first of all, then, so do you, we're just spinning out of a conversation about you being an apologist. So does that mean that you're also kind of a bit tentative with flirting?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. It's like alchemy for me, like finding somebody who I fancied, then getting the eye contact, maintaining the eye contact. It's exhausting. Then exhausting, but also tantalizing as well, but mostly exhausting, to be honest with you. Finding the guy you fancy, getting the eye contact, maintaining the eye contact, and then moving in, like, kind of swooping in, and that's it. You've got your prey. And that was generally...
Oh, no, but you've missed a step there. The next step is having an opening line that isn't completely embarrassing.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the thing, and that's why sort of alchemy is, because you sort of had to really kind of measure your sort of sense of, I'm going to say this, take it how you want to, but your sense of control over the situation. Because I was very aware then, as with, I'm sure, many other queers of all ages and of all proclivities, that I had a tendency to fall in love and then have very long unrequited relationships with people. More often than not, to be fair, okay, they didn't even know that I was in an unrequited relationship with them.
So you would meet them and then fall in love straight away?
Oh yeah, that was something that I would do a lot, especially in my late teens and early 20s.
Yeah, but that's so like just have a relationship in your head, basically.
Oh yeah, no, hated every minute of it, but also at the same time loved. It's that weird thing.
Yeah.
But it becomes so much part of your life. It's very hard to, it's really weird when you suddenly kind of realize that you're not actually living an unrequited in a relationship with anybody in your mind, And so for me, it was a massive emancipation. I'm living in the middle of London, and I'm therefore it's absolutely wallowing in this independence. And, like I said, I'd lived in New York, so it was the nearest thing I sort of found to that. And believe me, New York is a whole other story. That's a whole other...
That's another episode, yeah.
That's another episode.
So I want to talk about this emancipation and this freedom, but you've kind of just avoided my question about flirting.
We'll come back to that. No, we can come back to that. Because I think the bottom line was whilst I said it was really easy to pull, it was easy for me to pull, and it felt like, looking back on it, it felt like it happened quite a lot, which in reality, it probably didn't happen as much as it does for a lot of people. It's not like I was down there every night of the week pulling. I was probably down there
every second night, right?
Every second night, thank you very much. Yeah. or every third night on in a month that begins with F. I don't know. But
I really want to talk about this falling in love thing, because I know that that's so like that was something that was common to me, that I'd meet someone and be like, well, there are all these flaws here to this relationship. There's all these flaws that there's all these reasons why we're not compatible. But yeah, I'm going to throw myself into this and I'm going to make this work.
Oh, 110%.
And I'm not going to really tell you this, but you're in a relationship with me now, and I'm going to like design our wedding, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I just think it's really interesting. And is that something? So this is a question I'm asking. Do you think that's something that's just part of being a teenager, part of being a young adult and growing up, or is there something queer about that?
Thank you for changing teenager to young adult, because yes, I was quite a young adult when I sort of got over it. But I think that it is something. I think that it's something that happens to everybody. I feel that perhaps it is something that happens more within a queer context, because it's not always. Well, certainly within my generation, I think that. I mean, to be honest, these young, incredibly. I was going to say self-important. I didn't mean that, although there is an element of that as well. Self-confident young queers who are around today. It feels like life for them is so much easier than it was for us. And okay, I'm very happy that they appear to be having a better time than we did. However, we're not talking about them. We're talking about us.
No, but there is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for me, it was really about, I mean, I would often fall in love. I mean, half the problem was I'd fall in love with straight people, right? So I would fall in love with these guys who, to me, enveloped, encapsulated all these aspects of life, or of a being, of a guy that I felt was everything that I could possibly desire, which is obviously, you're obviously setting yourself up to fail. But then I would become totally kind of like infatuated. And I do think that there is an element of, for me, there's a lack of, there was a timidness which came from the lack of confidence to really kind of be who I totally wanted to be and feel confident about that in myself. And I think that as I've grown older, confidence, whether or not, it's about, self-belief, and whether or not it's true, it's about whether or not you can project it. If you project confidence, then you get everybody in the room. Everybody in the room can fall in love with you, let alone you fall in love with them. And I feel like the emancipational aspect of the Duke of Wellington was because it was somewhere that I frequented so much. And I'll give you the example of another venue that I went to a lot in New York, which was the Boiler Room. And it was a very similar thing there. Because I went there more often, I became more familiar with the clientele. I was more familiar with the space. I felt more at home there. I felt more confident. So if somebody was in there that I fancied, it was much easier for me to kind of make that move.
Because it was like, hey, welcome to my place.
It was like, hey, welcome to my place, precisely. And that, for me, was a revelation, and a real kind of learning curve for me. And it made me really want to sort of actually be more adventurous and seek out other venues and other places for the kind of men that I like. I like larger guys. And in the early to mid-90s, well, maybe even the later 90s, there actually was not many places you could go specifically for that. I remember there was a little tiny place called Little Turnstile at Holborn, in a tiny little alleyway. I think the last time I went there, it was like a vodka bar. But that was like the first sort of bear night in London, Little Turnstile in Holborn. It was really hard to find if you didn't know where it was. And again, similar kind of thing. That was a revelation, but it was also terrifying, because obviously then I kind of understood the dynamics of, therefore, kind of suddenly being in a room with all these bears and being a skinny guy standing at the other side of the wall meant that you were only there for one thing, which therefore made me feel very self-conscious. And I didn't like that. But I was a very self-conscious queer. I mean, I think a lot of queers are. But.
Well, yeah. So that's really fascinating, though. So going to that venue, and it being very obvious from the off why. I mean, I suppose that's true of most queer places, most male queer places, but being very, very apparent from the off while you were there.
I remember having a conversation with a nanny friend of mine when I lived in the States, and we went to, obviously, I lived outside of New York, and I would go into New York City all the time. I lived outside of New York, so it was quite kind of not provincial, but it was a small town in Westchester, Mount Kisco. I loved it. I loved everything about it. It was amazing. But I remember going out to a pub with a straight woman friend of mine. And I posed this question. I said, Dana, this is going to sound like this may sound like a crazy question, but when you go to a pub, no matter how slightly that feeling may come to you, do you always think that, oh my God, I might get laid tonight? Is that always something that is on your mind when you? She was like, hell yeah, of course it is. I was like, oh, okay. So straight people feel that too. You know what I mean? I was so like green. I was cabbage looking. But it's weird. Like now, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but as a middle-aged person, pubs are really quite a big social part of my life. So there is sort of looking at the pub as that sort of constant in your life. And when you're a teenager, you go into pubs because you're underage and you want to be seen to be hanging out with the older guys or the older women or the older peeps, and then you get really drunk, and then you know what I mean. And it's sort of like the pub is kind of like a rite of passage, and I think also in a pub context, it's very similarly British, very English place to go. We all grew up with a local pub that we all went to as teenagers. I'm pretty sure I can say that that's safe that we all did that. Certainly most of us, unless you do somewhere incredibly, out the way, incredibly isolated. But the pub, I just love going into pubs now and feeling so much more comfortable in myself. And it's almost like the ghost of Timberlina or Tim Past sort of is whirring around my head. And it's just like, it's so nice to be able to go into these places and just command the space, or just feel comfortable in the space, not even necessarily command it, but just be like a fella in a pub.
And do you think that's an age thing? Do you think that's because you're now in a couple?
Yeah, I think there's an age thing as to do with it. I think that it had to do with being in a couple. I think although, what we do is when we're out by ourselves is a completely different, obviously, experience. And, we have a very open-minded relationship. But I definitely think there's something to do with age. And for me, it's always been about really trying to sort of learn from the experiences in order to better oneself, but also then have a better time. For me, it's also about giving myself permission as I get older, regardless of how old that may be, but to, indulge in what I would never felt confident at when I was younger. You know what I mean? And I think that whilst I'm pretty sure that happens to everybody, again, regardless of the proclivity, I think being queer, obviously being queer experiences now is devastating for me, because there are so many places that aren't there anymore, because we were sort of, I feel, sold down the river of this kind of equality, which then made everything the same, and then said, well, of course you can go everywhere now, so why do we need to have gay pubs or gay or queer pubs? And it's a bit like this whole thing about well, should we have men's spaces? Yes, of course we should. Should we have women's spaces? Yes, of course we should. We should have spaces for people to hang out with the people that they feel like they belong with, or whether it be a cultural, whatever, cultural, faith, age, there should be spaces for people to meet their own kind. And I feel that's one of the saddest things I feel about not having these bars, these queer bars, especially the queer bars, because that was what was so great again about going back to the Duke of Wellington, was they were so mixed. So many of these bars were so mixed. Yes, there was this kind of there's a women's room and there's a men's room. I mean, the RBT used to have I think they used to have a men's room and a women's room.
Yeah,
between
so they're very mixed, but in separate rooms.
They're very mixed, but in separate rooms. Yeah, exactly. That's the way we like it. That's the way we like it. Everyone's welcome, but just stay with your own kind. But no, what I mean is, there was also, like I said, the room at the front was very mixed. It was the fact that there was this threshold, this step. You respected the fact that the room at the back was for women, was for lesbians. Lesbians were coming to the front, and of course, I kind of like used to kind of like jostle about with that, and how come you're allowed in here and we're not allowed in there? But it took me a long time to get the confidence to have those kind of conversations. But then you did, and it was fine, and that's how you sort of learnt about like women's spaces, and that, like I said, that kind of tied into this whole kind of like queer feminist theory that we were studying. So we were so utterly right on. It was really kind of not scary. It was great. It was really great, but it was like it was very right on. I mean, it's funny seeing how right on people think they are now, and you just think, my goodness gracious me, it's kind of a different world. It's very interesting.
Well, because people are more right on now, or because they have nothing on you?
Well, they think they're more right on now, but I kind of feel like all of this kind of like this queer theory, this kind of feminist theory, and how it attached itself to queer theory at the time when we were studying it all, it's a bit like the idea of being woke now. It was about just being aware of cultural difference, not even necessarily cultural difference, but just difference. It's about understanding the reasoning behind where people come from in their set of beliefs and having an open discourse about that, recognizing and respecting respecting that, respecting it or not respect, but it's respecting the individual, not necessarily respecting the belief, but being able to have an open and frank conversation about it, and then and then disagreeing with them, like agreeing to disagree with them, like respecting that disagreeing. And it feels like you can't necessarily do that now. I'm not quite sure where it is. I find it very alienating, actually, and I find it alienating for me, and as somebody who's not even that old, to feel kind of alienated by that. Quite a considerable number within a community which I spent quite a lot of time, campaigning, if not being out and proud and paving the to a certain degree, paving the way for what has come. I just find it a little bit strange, and maybe that is a consequence of not having the spaces to call home.
Ooh, bringing it back round. But so are you saying that because now the way that the conversations progress is that you're either right or you're wrong, and there's no kind of there's no you do you, I'll do me. It's like this is the position you must be.
I find it very tricky. I don't really understand it, and And I feel like I should be more confrontational about it, because I do feel it's like no platforming, or not allowing people to speak their mind because it doesn't go along with the discourse of what people should be talking about. I just think it's an anathema to learning and understanding difference. That is, tolerance doesn't even come into the equation there, because if you're not willing to create a platform that allows, whether or not you agree with them or disagree, but to allow that interaction, to allow that engagement and that conversation to happen, I think is a really dangerous stance to have.
Yeah, I guess it just depends where your lines are, though, doesn't it? Because in some instances, I can see why. Like if someone's belief is that you can't be you can't be a different gender to the one that you were assigned at birth, then should we even be humoring that conversation? Agreed.
But I mean, we've totally kind of gone off track there, and I'm not making an excuse not to talk about it. But I mean, it does make me think that I wonder if there is a tangible link between venues in which you can feel safe and feel at home, and therefore feel more relaxed, and therefore not have to agendicize everything. And no pun intended, although it was quite a good pun. I
Okay.
feel like you could have a much wider, greater queer discourse when there were venues which sort of suited your temperament and your mood and your brethren or your sorority or just your peeps generally. I mean, up to the elbow. I mean, like the garage, upstairs at the garage, up to the elbow. That was an amazing club at the garage, great music venue, Highbury Tube, and it was queer as fuck. It was really queer as fuck. Like I said, when Del LaGrace Volcano came and did a talk in our queer studies class, that was incredible. The fact that now it's like, well, would that happen? To be honest, I haven't really hung out with Del for a number of years, so I'm not entirely sure what their stance is or what his stance is now. But it just feels like a lot of the discourse that's coming out now is just like, I find that alienating. I find it actually non-welcoming. I find it self-isolating. And I do feel that terms like isolating or marginalizing are words that come about when there are not institutions which can support that. When I say institutions, I mean spaces that can support that kind of crowd or that kind of dialogue.
Okay. Do you want to move on?
Shall we, please? Can we move on? Because it's going to become very complicated.
So I've scribbled this down, and I want to ask you questions about it. I'm taking it right back to a smutty place. You said before that you were really attracted to straight men, and that's something that that's never been for me. Like I've never really understood it. So I'd like for you to speak on behalf of everyone who's attracted to straight men and tell me why that
Sweeping
is.
generalization.
Yeah, like is it a confidence thing? Is it like what is it about straight men that
I just want to let me just clarify that by saying it wasn't like it would ever be requited. By the way, it wasn't like I went out of my way to find straight men to prove that straight men were queer, although that was something that I sort of believed in at the time to somehow support my argument of my failed conquests. But I mean, for me, I'll be quite frank with you, Kay, looking back on it, I think it probably has to do with the fact that, my parents split up when I was very young. And I would see guys of a certain type, of a certain ilk, of a certain build, of a certain sensibility, who would it transpire then be straight, and I would literally just be equivalent. And I think that perhaps there was less of whilst there was definitely a sexual interest, I think it was more about idolizing people who, to me, had the perfect life, rather than actually giving myself a good stern talking to and say, pull yourself together. You're going to make your life miserable for the next 3 years. Who do you think you are? Bring it down a notch. Try and find somebody else who kind of like, do you know what I mean?
But and so what do you mean then by perfect life?
Well, I think, you construct an idea of what perfect life is. I mean, for me, it was like, the perfect life is them, is them with me being their wife. And that was weird as well, because it never really occurred to me that in itself was a very difficult threshold to cross. And how would that manifest itself? And how would that work? You know what I mean? But it was much more about this person represents that which I mean, and also there was definitely the physicality of it was like a very kind of Rubensy sort of cherubic kind of guys. These guys who had like these really kind of, or at least on the outside, were certainly kind of like very cool, were either the center of attention within their peer group, or listened to really cool music and bought all the records. I mean, the funny thing about that is just looking back on it and just, I mean, A, it's embarrassing for myself, but B, like I was so preoccupied with that I remember the advances of others who actually, if I'm completely honest, would have been the wonderful boyfriends and actually fitted the bill so totally. But I was so self-absorbed with these other people that I would become completely hopelessly in love with. I didn't even give them a second look in, and I just, oh my God. I mean, so yeah, all your queers out there, I'm sure that there are those who kind of still go through this weird, unrequited, strange, self-loathing understanding of who you are. But you just kind of, just remember who you are. I think the thing with all of that was, I think, having such a a loss of a sense of who I was. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
So
Craving the attention of others. Look at what I do now. I'm a performer. I crave attention all the time. I constantly need to be made to feel, I need people's attention. I need to be made to feel all right often.
But do you think that then you get your sense of self-worth from other people's appreciation of you?
I think that one can. I don't think I necessarily do that all the time. But again, that is something which within the culture that we live in, it's really hard to escape that and just be yourself. I mean, it's one thing I'm doing right now. It's like I'm living in this incredible house. I'm in the countryside. I have all this space around me. Now, this is something which I longed to have and made manifest. I made this happen. But it's so easy to, for me, forget what your own assets are because you're so busy looking for them in other people. You're so busy sort of comparing yourself to other people, or you're so busy admiring others that you don't admire yourself. And I think that it's quite good to feel good about yourself and admire yourself. Mm-hmm.
So is this the right time then for me to bring up the police officer?
Oh my God, I nearly said his name out loud then, but I'm not sure if that's loud.
I can only come up with PC Plod.
PC Plod.
Can we call him that or something else?
Call him JK. So we can go over his initials. JK.
Okay.
Yeah, he was there. He was at the Duke of Wellington. I met him in there.
So how did you meet? Like, what happened?
I think it was one of those rare nights where the universe, the stars aligned. I was feeling cool, calm, and collected. Rare occasion. Obviously, then I met him, and it all went downhill from there. So our eyes meet across the bar, and he's kind of got that great burliness. He's got ticked out. I get my sort of mental tick list out. He's got like the burliness. He's got that straight lookingness. He's got dark hair, dark eyes, rugby player build. I seem to remember he was very tired that night. He was often very tired, but I guess he had a very challenging job. So, I just kind of wanted to be there to help him put his feet up, cook him a nice meal.
And that was your opening line, right?
That was my opening line, yeah. Yeah, let me help you put your feet up and cook you a nice meal. Transpired, he lived up the road from the pub as well. So my whole thing was like, well, hey, do you come here often? Do you live locally? Well, yes, he did. And of course, then it was just like, oh my God, so I had this guy who I'd met who lived around the corner from me. So we were sort of, not only were we kind of dating each other fleetingly, as it turned out, but it was just around the corner. I was young, he was a bit older, and then he worked for a special branch, allegedly. I mean, who knows how true it was, but in my mind, it was true enough. So he worked for a special branch, and so the rumor mill was, or according to him, he would have to go off and disappear for days on end and go undercover. He worked down at King's Cross, was his thing. So he would dress up as a homeless person and go down and figure out who was dealing drugs and do the kind of thing. Allegedly. That's how it. So it sounds great, but of course the thing was for me, it was just like, you never call. Where is he? What's going on? So of course I was a complete drama queen, and he was aloof. So that obviously didn't work out too well.
But so you never went on a recce to like go around King's Cross seeing if you could find a homeless person.
Never even thought about that.
Oh man, that'd be the first
God,
thing
in
I'd
hindsight, I should have you could have gone down there on a bus and go, I'm looking for my boyfriend, looks like this.
Yeah.
Where are you? But that was cool, and he was very nice. But he introduced me to opera. Actually, he liked Puccini. He liked fine wine, fine dining.
But I'm still stuck on this special ops thing. So it wasn't just him like trying to avoid you.
Well, who knows? Clearly, I was a bit of a psycho. I'll make no bones about that. But no, I can see that would be an issue. I could see that would think. I mean, conversely, he'd call me up in the middle of the night and wax lyrical about how great he was and that he was completely full of love and and they're playing Big Love by Fleetwood Mac and
that's
I know,
sickening.
Totally. So he was leading me along very handsomely.
And how long did that all last?
Literally a summer.
But those are the best kinds of romances.
It was kind of hot though. It was very hot, yeah.
But Big Love by Fleetwood Mac, I mean, that's a bit cheesy, right?
Yeah, but it worked. I mean, that love, lasted for days. That's all I needed. That was amazing.
Oh.
And it was great to be able to walk up the road to his. And then but I do remember months later that dreadful moment of going into the Duke of Wellington and who would be in there with a bunch of guys, but police officer with his, in inverted commas, new beau that he'd found.
And did you do that thing where you just pretended you didn't know each other?
No. I think I possibly did, but he went, "Hey, Tim," and of course then my heart sank, and I thought, well, how am I going to get him back out? He's clearly with somebody else who I was then introduced to, and there was possibly some folly of some sort of very, very, he was fairly aloof anyway, but this kind of aloof apology. I don't know. It was just all very, it was all a bit messy.
I feel like there's unresolved things here.
There's a lot of unresolved things. I still go past, whenever I go past the house, the bit where his house is, I always look over there and suck my teeth with disdain of what could have been,
I can go there now and throw a brick through the window if you want. Just give me the
Please
address.
do. I'll tell you exactly where it was. Off air.
Brilliant.
But he had a Doc Martin boot. Maybe he had a pair of Doc Martin boots, which presumably had been like the pair that he first used when he was like a Bobby, and he had them by his front doors, and he had turned them into flower pots. I thought that was very cute.
So that was a good thing, was it? I wasn't supposed to laugh.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. You can laugh.
Oh, why didn't he get them bronzed?
Yeah, that would have been a good thing. Yeah, could have done that.
Oh. And so were there any other fumbles or little romances with people at the Duke?
Well, there were, yes. There were. Yes, there were a number. I remember meeting this one guy, and he totally fit the bill. And, it was kind of like right raunchy, right kind of like big fella, quite kind of, again, sort of rugby player. I was really into rugby players then. And he touched me up in the toilet, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. But then I said, I live around the corner, do you want to come back to mine? And he went, and he had a very high voice. He had a really high-pitched voice, which I wasn't expecting. So he said, yes, please. So he did. So then it sounds terrible, but I engineered the whole thing so we went back to my place with saying as little as possible so that we could have our rumpy pumpy without him actually saying anything, because as soon as he said something, it totally destroyed the whole... That funny.
So the...
Terrible thing, Sam.
It is, yeah, it is pretty terrible. But so the whole touching you up, did he just like follow you into the bathroom?
Yes, he did. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Stood next to me at a urinal.
Oh, romance.
Oh, I know.
But yeah, isn't that, I mean, I'm not, the pitch of his voice isn't the thing that I'm necessarily focusing on, but isn't it really annoying when you really fancy someone until they start talking and then you're
yes,
like,
absolutely.
oh,
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a very odd thing as well, because sort of, do you know what I mean? It shouldn't, I guess another punny thing here, but it shouldn't say so much, and yet it does, if you see what I mean.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's the content of what they're saying, and you're just like, oh, please just shut up so we can get...
Please just shut up. Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it is just, the way in which they say it. Oh.
Yeah. But it was a really good place to take people for a drink as well. It was a really good place to kind of be saying, oh, hey, like you meet somebody, say, up west or just... I think maybe I've met somebody who lived in Stoke Newington, and I was like, well, hey, do you want to, let's go to a pub, and then they'd be like, well, where do you want to go? I'd say, well, we can go to the Duke of Wellington, Bulls Pond Road, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I've heard about that place. Well, I've heard about that place. Yes, we'll go there. Because it was very much on the map. So you'd meet there. You know what I mean? It was like you'd meet there. You could check out the person. You were close enough to home, for it never to be an issue, whether or not you need to have an excuse to run away from them or just to be able to go, right, yeah, instantaneous chemistry, you're coming back to my place.
But how did you meet people then? Because it wouldn't have been. Sorry.
No.
It sounds so like, tell me about the past.
But
there was no internet, so how did you meet people?
No, exactly. But this is it. I mean, this is what was so funny looking back on it, because I swear to whoever it is upstairs, I swear to Mother Earth that there are instances in my life where I cannot conceive how we managed to make that work without having mobile phones.
Right? Yeah.
But I think I think, you know, you'd leave a message and you would trust that the message was received, and you would go with it, you know. And more often than not, that was how things worked out when it was fine.
But how did you meet them in the first place if you didn't meet them in the bar?
Well, this is an interesting thing. So you could meet people in the street. I mean, for somebody that didn't like cruising places, like as I said earlier, I was very intimidated by cruising, and it didn't really suit me because I didn't like not being able to see people's faces, and I didn't like the anonymous sex, but I quite like to know people before I take them home. And I also like doing it at home rather than outside. Anyway, you get the gist, right? I like to know who it is I'm sleeping with in that respect.
Yeah, I just think that's weird.
Oh, really?
No, carry on.
So you would meet, you know, you would say you would be in first, you would meet people. You would meet people in bookshops, or you would meet people in the street. So you could cruise people in the streets, or, you know, you might meet somebody. I met a lot of people like doing, say, postgraduate courses, and like I said, because there's a whole kind of queer studies contingent, there was quite a lot of sort of like afternoon do's and tea parties and sort of like readings and things like that. So you might go to things like that and you'd meet them, and then you'd be like, hey, do you want to go for a drink afterwards? And then you'd be like, well, yeah, sure, where should we go? Do you know anyone? You'd be like, hey, let's go to the Duke of Welly. Just so happens I live around the corner, but you don't need to know about that yet.
Until I've plied you with a few drinks.
And decided that I'm
But the thing, so, and it will only take a drink or two to decide if you fall in love with them.
I was just going to say, also, I wouldn't really go out my way to ply them with drinks. That's not an appropriate thing to say.
Okay, sorry. Okay, take that back. But cruising in the street.
Yeah.
How do you do it? I know.
God, I love that. I love that you're asking me that. I love that. I love that you're asking that. I mean, presumably you use phone apps to find lovers, if you want to call them lovers.
Yes,
hookups.
Networking apps. Yeah.
Networking apps. Yes, of course, when you want to network, you use a networking app. There's a certain amount of kind of cruising that happens there, but it has to be in a sort of very kind of highly sort of haikued, very sort of abrupt, very short shrift vocalization of word games, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you have to really kind of capture that, and you have to do. We see cruising down the street. You know, it's very much a kind of like, again, it's the eye contact, keeping the eye contact, measuring the eye contact, and then there's a beat where you see somebody, you catch their eyes, and then when they walk past you, you then wait, and then you turn around, like you wait, so like, you turn around, and if they turn around as well, it's in the bag. The question is then, what do you do? I mean, usually I'd be a quivering wreck by then, so I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I'd see behind me. But yeah, that totally, or in a room or at a do, totally. I would definitely. Oh my God! But also, you can't buy that sort of adrenaline rush. You can't buy as a drug. If they could bottle that feeling, that tingly sensation of when you know you've got somebody in your gaze. And, you know, that is not going to stop until something quite carnal happens. That is great. And also, there are people with whom I've had that and then not seen them again for months, if you see what I mean.
Well, So
you get the eye contact, you get all of that frisson, you get the whole chemistry, set and that caboodle, but you don't actually meet them properly until, say, weeks later. So this might happen. I mean, straight people do this all the time. This is not an unusual thing. And I think that also it was much more frequent for gay people to do that because they didn't have networking apps, let alone mobile phones. So of course you had to do it. You had to do it by.
But it just takes this leap of faith, doesn't it? Like, especially in terms of the orientation context. Like,
oh, it's hugely dangerous.
Yeah.
It was hugely dangerous. Absolutely. I mean, and that was the thing. I mean, a lot of people got queer bashed often because they had made a pass at somebody who was not queer themselves. And in fact, that was something which in Dalston at the time was, you know what I mean? That was that was the nature of the culture that we lived in. I was incredibly fortunate. Like me and I think me and my kind of close friends then, we were incredibly fortunate. None of us really fell foul of anybody. I think I got beaten up once. I got hustled at a bus stop and had my wallet stolen, but I didn't get beaten up. And I never, touch a wood. It's nothing terrible has ever happened, but it did. And it used to happen quite regularly. So it was something that you thought about. But at the same time, in the heat of that moment, all sense of personal safety kind of goes out the window. I hate to say it.
Oh. And then but do you just then go up to the person and be like, oh, hi.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah. Oh, hey. Yeah. So,
I have a place nearby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
you want to go for a drink or you want to go for coffee or da-da-da-da-da. Yeah.
Oh, so you have to go and talk to them. Oh.
Well, I mean, you could just find a little alley and go and do something. Yeah. That could happen. That could totally happen.
I can't. I can't imagine. I think I'd just be terrified.
Really?
I did. There was one time that I picked someone up on the bus, and I don't even think I fancied them. I think I was just like, "Oh, this could be an adventure." But other than that, I've never, ever, ever. Like, I just can't imagine doing it. And in fact, I think when I see someone cruising me on the street, I will then get out Grindr to see if they're on Grindr. Like, it's just the total whim's way.
Like now. No, I know, but that's true. But it's sort of like a security blanket, isn't it? It's like, oh my God. And again, it's like you're on a bus and it's like, I don't know if Grindr works on bus or Growl or whatever it is, whatever your preferred social networking app is. But maybe you can tell me, if you're on a bus and somebody else is on that bus, do you stay within proximity to them constantly while you're on the bus? I suppose you must.
What, like follow what? On
an app.
On an would you be on the same?
Yeah, if you're on the same bus. If you pass somebody downstairs and you catch their eye, you go upstairs. Are you gonna then like grab your phone and check out your preferred social networking app and see if they're still on the bus?
Yeah, because is their location the last time they logged in, or is it just following them as the bus moves? Yeah.
Oh, they're constantly logged in. I mean, like I said, it's a great safety, great safety net to have that. Oh, I'll just see if they are online and get more of their details so that I can then, follow them some more.
Yeah, find out what their height is in centimeters before I say hello.
Exactly, all of that. What their voice is, do they have the right tone? I'm just going to name drop by way of kind of other places and other past moments of massive titillation, not even mild titillation. When I was in San Francisco, I'd lived in New York and I traveled over to the West Coast because I'd always wanted to go there. And again, this was the early 90s, so it was still very much a kind of, it's a queer mecca now, but then it was much more kind of sort of more accessible, shall we say. It wasn't quite the capitalist machine that it is now. So there were all these funny little places. And there's a place called Cafe Noe, and I'm not sure if that's still there, but it's a lovely cafe bar on Market Street, just as you get to Castro. And then further along Market Street, there used to be a bookshop. There's a famous bookshop in San Francisco. It's not that one. It was one that was around the corner. Very dusty little bookshop. And I remember being in there, and I saw this guy in there, and we cruised each other to pieces in the bookshop. And then, because of course I had no self-confidence, I didn't know what to say. I was a blithering wreck. So all I could do was just look. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. But I knew there was something there. So I'd get that trembling kind of adrenaline rush. And I walked out of the bookshop. Or maybe he walked out of the bookshop. He walked out of the bookshop. He crossed the road. I came out of the bookshop. In fact, I remember I wrote a funny old play years ago, and I used this as one of the things about meeting this guy, the guy that I ended up in the play. I end up marrying this guy, but he crossed the road. I come out of the bookshop. He's looking at me as I come out of the bookshop. I then walk up the road. He's looking across at me. I look across at him. I kind of go past him, but I'm still passing glances at him. I then go into Cafe Noe. He then comes into the cafe. On 2 separate tables, we have 2 cups of coffee. Like, okay, this is how ridiculous it was. I'm still like going out of my mind. I don't know what to do with it. He's there having a coffee. I've literally been spending a year being a nanny, having no sexual experiences whatsoever over in New York because I was terrified and I was very, very young. I then subsequently went back. It was much more exciting. But I'm in Cafe Noe with this guy. He's there on 2 separate tables. We have a cup of coffee. He then leaves out of one exit, and I was like, right, this is it. I've got to do this. I walk out the other exit. We meet on the corner, and that is when we then have the conversation. And his name is Vince Quackenbush, and he lives now in Albany, but he was a rite of passage for me. That was amazing. That was being, we cruised each other all the way up. From inside the bookshop to the cafe, having this whole other... I can't tell you that the arousal and the crazy feeling of that titillation of just cruising is can be as fulfilling as the actual manifested.
Oh, it sounds agonizing.
But that's part of the joy. That's part of the joy.
I'm just so bad at this. I'm just a bit like, are we going to do this or not? Let's move.
Well, I know, but I kind of feel like that's the sort of... I think that as we're talking about it, I kind of feel like that is what's lacking now. That sort of romance. We want everything now. We want it 10 minutes ago. We don't even want it. We don't want to wait. We don't have to go through any kind of like emotions. We just want to go through with the act. We want to get it done right now, right here, right now. None of this kind of romantic wanderlust.
Oh, and what you did was romantic. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think on a scale of 1 to 10 and being gay, yes, because often there isn't a lot of romance in gay. I mean, no, there isn't. No, because we're just like wham, bam, thank you, man. I mean, the idea that you would go into a dark cemetery and find somebody's body to have frottage against without even knowing what they look like or what their name is, let alone whether or not they're using what, they may also be carrying. You telling me that's romantic? Is that why you would go? No, exactly. I think the fact that you could have that, I don't know, it's like the kind of, for want of a better metaphor, the luxury car version of wham bam thank you ma'am. It's like it's slightly more refined. It arouses more of your senses. It gives you more things to play with. I just love the idea that there's a whole rounded story for that. It's like, I don't know if you ever lay in bed and think about all of your sexual conquests and try and go through them and how each and every one of those went. But I love the idea that I like it when there's a story. At least there's a story. There's a bigger experience.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's a better anecdote involved. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
But if you put in all this effort and then the sex is disappointing, like that, like, no, there's something to be said about, like, okay, let's just go for it. Oh, this isn't for me. Bye.
I think that's also how maybe you make friends. I was having this conversation with some other people the other day, actually, about like, it was another podcast I was doing with some friends, and we had an agony aunt section. Somebody wrote in and basically they were saying they don't have to have a conversation before they have sex, and we were a bit like, what? It's like, well, you just gotta like bring it down a notch, babes. Like you gotta make friends. You can make friends. Just because you're all gays doesn't mean that you have to have sex before you can be friends, But I do feel like there is a lot of that these days. It's like, oh, I can't talk to you. Why not? Because you're not attractive. It's like, well, we're human beings. That's the thing that brings us all together, whether you like it or not. It's a very different way of communicating. It's a very different way of socializing. It's a very different way of, getting a shag. And I know that it was a lot slower, and I quite like the fact that it was a lot slower. I'm saying this now. At the time, it was absolute turmoil. But I like the idea that you invested your time in getting that shag, and even if it was like over the course of an evening and not on a phone, but like chasing somebody around a venue for 4 hours, and you're actually kind of like
following them into the bathroom,
or whatever, or trying to get them away from their friends, or you're trying to get away from your friends so that you can have that little secret conversation. I do. That is a very nice thing, which I think maybe doesn't happen quite so much now. Can't believe you never cruised somebody down the street.
Have
you?
I just don't think I mean, maybe I have. It just fills me with dread. It's really, but also I'm not very good. I think I just also don't notice I just assume people wouldn't be flirting with me.
See, that's the thing. You need to get rid of that. Stop thinking that way, because that's no help to anybody, least of all you.
But I mean, it's not.
It's clearly not a major issue. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. But I think if I'm in a place where that kind of thing happens, then I'm expecting it, so it's okay. But if I'm on the street, I'm like not expecting it. I'm just like, la la la. Here I'm singing a song in my head.
Yes, you've hit on something there. And for me, it's always been the moments when you're least expecting it, when something has happened. And I think there's a euphoria which is involved in that weird kind of, again, alchemy, which is just so utterly brilliant, and makes up in so many ways for the times of unrequited maudlin, self-loathing, being completely self-isolating.
Oh, but I do love that as well.
I mean, it can become. It's sort of, there's a pleasure in the self-indulgence of that. I think there can be.
Yeah, and listening to records and just feeling sad. Oh, so much fun.
Totally.
Okay. Did you ever go to the Duke of Wellington? Well, if you did, I would love to hear more from you. Tell me your stories and share any photos or anecdotes on social media. You can find me across most platforms with the username KAndersonMusic. And you can find out more about Timberlina at www.timberlina.co.uk. And as well as that, Timberlina hosts her own podcast called Live from Rye, which you can hear on all good podcast platforms. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all good streaming platforms. If you like this episode, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told someone who you think might be interested in finding out more. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.